They tell you the Imperium is held together by heroes. It isn't. It's held together by families like mine. I was born beneath a ceiling I have never seen. They tell me it exists. They tell me there is sky somewhere above Hive Primus, that beyond the stacked kilometers of hab blocks, manufactoria, shrines, and corpse processing levels, there is an open void where light falls unfiltered. I believe them the way a child believes in saints, whose bones they will never touch. Faith does not require proof. It requires endurance. My earliest memory is not of my mother's face or my father's voice, but of the sound of the siren, low, constant, impossible to ignore. It marked the hours long before I understood numbers. When it howled, we woke. When it howled again, we worked. When it fell silent, we slept, if exhaustion allowed it. The siren was the first thing that taught me obedience. We lived in Habstack, 19 Gamma, level 342. A unit designed for 4, occupied by 9. My mother, Elora. My father, Joran. My older sister, Lycia. My younger brother, Hal. 2 uncles who lost their jobs in the recycling mills and never found new ones. A grandmother who coughed blood into rags she washed and reused until they disintegrated. And me, always me, the quiet one, the watcher. Our room smelled of machine oil, boiled fungus, and old fear. The walls sweated condensation from pipes that carried something hot and chemical above our heads, day and night. At night, the lumen strip flickered like a dying star, and shadows crawled across the ceiling like living things. We learned not to talk about the shadows. Superstition was safer than curiosity. Every morning began with prayer, not because we were devout, but because the walls listened. Vox grills embedded in the hab blocks broadcast the litany of waking, and missing the response was noted. Somewhere, someone marked it down. Somewhere, a name was erased for less. Blessed is the Emperor, Lord of all, my father would say, voice hoarse from sleep and dust. Blessed is his eternal vigilance, we replied in unison, 9 voices blending into one tired sound. My mother always bowed her head longer than necessary. She said it was respect. I think it was fear. After prayer, we ate, if it could be called that. Protein ration bars stamped with the Aquila, recycled water with a metallic aftertaste, and sometimes, on feast days, a scoop of corpse starch porridge. We never asked where the starch came from. Asking was another kind of heresy. My father worked in the lower manufactoria, assembling targeting arrays for las rifles he would never hold. 12-hour shifts when the quotas were light, 14 when they were not. His hands were permanently stained black, the skin cracked and split, veins swollen like cables beneath the flesh. He used to tell me stories while he scrubbed them in the communal sink, water running brown. They say each rifle saves 1,000 lives, he once said, staring at his reflection in the scratched metal mirror. So if that's true, I've saved millions. Have you? I asked. He didn't answer. He just turned off the tap and dried his hands on his trousers. My mother worked higher up in the hab recycling sector, sorting. Always sorting. Waste from one level became sustenance for another. Her job was to decide which scraps were usable, which were fed into the grinders, which were burned as fuel. She came home smelling of rot and disinfectant, her eyes hollowed out by the things she saw but never described. Lycia was pressed into service at 16. She cleaned shrine floors in the ecclesiarchy levels, polishing stone that had never known dirt, while her own knees bled from kneeling. She used to hum hymns in her sleep, melodies looping endlessly, like she was afraid silence might summon something. Hal was too young to work. Too young, they said. But the scribes had already marked his name for future allocation. We all knew it. He knew it too. Children in the hive learn inevitability before they learn hope. As for me, I watched, I listened, I learned how to be small. The hive teaches you early that attention is dangerous. The Arbites notice you, the overseers notice you, the enforcers notice you, and if you are noticed, you are judged. Judgment rarely ends in mercy. The day everything changed did not announce itself. There was no siren, no prayer bell, no warning. It began with a tremor that rattled the walls and sent dust drifting down like gray snow. We froze, all of us, listening. Tremors were not uncommon. The hive shifted. Old levels collapsed. New supports were driven in. The city was always devouring itself. Then came the screams. They echoed through the ventilation shafts, distant but unmistakable. Panic has a sound. It rises and falls, a chorus without words. My grandmother crossed herself and whispered a prayer I had never heard before. The vox grills crackled to life, but instead of hymns, we heard static. Long, distorted, angry. Somewhere deep in the hive, something had gone wrong. The siren followed, but this one was different. Not the call to work, not the call to rest. This was the alarm reserved for things we were not meant to survive. "Stay inside," my father said, immediately. His voice had changed, harder, sharper. "No matter what you hear." We heard boots in the corridor, heavy, armored. Orders barked through rebreathers. The Arbites were moving. That meant whatever was happening mattered. Hours passed, or minutes. Time lost meaning in the dark. The lumen strip died, plunging us into shadow, broken only by the red glow of emergency markers. Hal began to cry, quiet at first, then louder, terror spilling out of him. My mother pulled him close, rocking back and forth, murmuring prayers that overlapped and contradicted each other. Then the door shook, once, twice, a heavy impact that made the frame groan. "Open in the name of the God Emperor," a voice commanded from the other side, amplified, inhumanly calm. My father hesitated, just for a moment. In that moment, I saw everything he was weighing. Obedience, survival, the knowledge that refusal was worse than compliance. He opened the door. Our bites filled the doorway, black armor swallowing the light, visors reflecting our fear back at us. Behind them stood a man in red robes, his augmetic eye whirring softly as it focused on us one by one. "Infection risk," the robed man said flatly. "This HAB unit is within the quarantine zone." "What does that mean?" my mother asked. The man did not look at her when he answered. "It means the Emperor requires a sacrifice. They took my sister first." Lycia didn't scream. She just looked back at us, eyes wide, lips moving in silent prayer as they dragged her into the corridor. My mother collapsed, clawing at the floor. My father tried to follow, and an Arbite's baton struck him across the chest, sending him sprawling. Hal screamed then, a raw, animal sound. They took my grandmother next. She went quietly, coughing blood, onto an Arbite's greave. The man in red made a note on his slate. "Efficiency acceptable," he said. When they reached for Hal, something inside my father broke. He lunged. The shot was deafening in the confined space. Red mist sprayed across the wall. My father fell without a sound, his body hitting the floor hard enough to shake the room. My mother's scream never ended, even when they dragged her away, even when her voice faded down the corridor. They did not take me. They did not take my uncles. We were deemed non-essential to the purge, left behind with the bodies and the blood and the smell of burned flesh. When the door closed, the silence was worse than the screams had been. I sat there for a long time, staring at my father's body, at the way his eyes were still open, reflecting the red emergency lights. I waited for grief, for rage, for something. What I felt instead was understanding. This was life in the Imperium, not glory, not heroism, not banners and hymns, just survival measured in arbitrary mercy, delivered at the barrel of a gun. And I understood then that if I was to live, truly live, I would have to become invisible. So I learned how to keep my head down, how to echo prayers without believing them, how to work until my hands bled and thank the Emperor for the privilege. I learned that families are liabilities, love is weakness, and hope is a resource more tightly controlled than food. Years passed, decades maybe. The hive does not mark time in years for people like me. It marks it in quotas met and quotas failed. I grew older, thinner, harder. I was reassigned from HAB maintenance to civilian logistics, then to emergency salvage. Always closer to danger, always closer to death. Each promotion a reminder that survival was not reward, but preparation. I married once, a woman named Sarah. She worked in water purification. We shared a unit smaller than the one I grew up in. We shared rations, exhaustion, and silence. When she became pregnant, we said nothing. Silence was safer. Our daughter lived for 3 months. They said the air filters failed. They said the water was contaminated. They said many things. I buried her in a mass crypt without a name. Sarah stopped speaking after that. 3 months later, she volunteered for a penal labor draft. I never saw her again. Now I am old, older than my father ever was. My hands shake when I wake. My lungs burn when I breathe. The siren still calls me, and I still answer. Sometimes, when the hive is quiet, rare moments, fleeting, I think about the sky, about light, about a life where survival is not the highest form of devotion. Then the siren sounds again, and I rise. Because in the Imperium of man, mercy is not salvation. It is simply being allowed to endure one more day. I do not remember when my name stopped mattering. At some point, it became easier to answer to numbers, to work unit designations, to the barked order of an overseer who would never know my face beyond its utility. Names are for the remembered. We exist to be counted. The hive changed as I aged, or perhaps I did. Levels once sealed were reopened, strict and repurposed. New shrines rose over old mass graves. The walls accumulated layers of prayer scratchings, overlapping litanies carved by desperate hands. Every surface told the same story in different words. Endure, obey, survive. I was reassigned again. Civilian Emergency Response. A polite title for those sent in after disasters to retrieve what could still serve the Imperium. We entered collapsed habs, breached manufactoria, reactor-adjacent zones still humming with lethal radiation. We recovered tools, data slates, occasionally bodies, more often, parts of bodies. The first time I stepped over a child's remains without stopping, I knew something essential in me had finally died. We were told this work mattered, that every bolt recovered, every intact component salvaged, strengthened the Emperor's grasp on humanity's future. I repeated the words when required. I even believed them, sometimes. Belief is another survival trait. The hive never slept, but it did dream. Its dreams were made of noise, distant artillery, void ships docking far above, the grinding of macro forges that shook the bones in my chest. Rumors spread faster than plague. Xenos incursions, heretic cults, warp disturbances sealed behind adamantium doors and forgotten until they were not. Civilians were not told the truth. We were told just enough. One cycle, the prayer broadcasts changed tone. The hymns grew harsher, the sermons longer. The word vigilance was repeated until it lost meaning. Enforcer patrols doubled. Curfews were enforced with sudden brutality. Something was coming. I was assigned to level 611 on the day the sky fell. We felt it first, a pressure change, a wrongness in the air that made my teeth ache. Then the alarms, not hive alarms, planetary ones, the kind reserved for extinction-level threats. The Vox speakers screamed orders over each other. Shelter, evacuate, report to mustering points. Contradictions layered until none of them made sense. We ran anyway. Civilians always run, even when there is nowhere to go. The ceiling split open 3 blocks ahead of us, peeled back like rotten skin. Fire poured down. Metal screamed. People vanished mid-step, reduced to shadows burned into the walls. I remember falling. I remember heat. I remember thinking absurdly that I had forgotten to pray. When I woke, the world was red. Not emergency lighting, fire. Whole sections of the hive burned, casting a hellish glow through the smoke. The air was thick with ash and something sweeter, coppery. I tasted blood with every breath. We were under attack. Not Xenos, not yet. Worse. The sky above the hive, what little of it I could see through the fractured levels, was streaked with contrails. Imperial. The Navy was bombarding its own world. Exterminatus was a word we all knew, but this was not that. This was cleansing. Surgical annihilation of infected sectors. The rumors had been true. A cult, deep-rooted, widespread, too many to purge quietly. I saw them then, pouring from shattered habs and hidden passages. Civilians twisted into something else, flesh marked with symbols that hurt to look at, eyes burning with unnatural fervor. They screamed praises to things that were not the Emperor. The guard arrived soon after. They advanced in lines, lasguns barking in disciplined volleys. They did not hesitate. They did not distinguish. Cultist and civilian fell the same way, bodies collapsing into smoking heaps. I pressed myself into a recess, shaking, as a guardsman stepped over me without looking down. His boots were slick with blood. His face was young beneath the grime, terrified, determined. I understood then that to the Imperium, we were terrain. The fighting lasted days, or hours. Time broke apart in the smoke and screaming. When it ended, entire levels were sealed off forever, marked with warning sigils and forgotten. We survivors were gathered in holding zones, screened by robed officials and silent machines. Questions were asked, tests administered. Those who failed were taken away. I passed. I always pass. Afterward, life resumed. It always does. The hive does not mourn. It reallocates. I was given a new assignment, new quarters, a new ration schedule. No mention was made of the dead. I sometimes think about my sister, about my mother, about my daughter, whose name no one remembers. I wonder if their atoms now reinforce a wall, fuel a generator, feed another family. There is a comfort in that thought, to be useful, even in death. Now, as I record this, not in writing but in memory because writing is dangerous, I feel my body failing. My lungs fill with fluid when I lie down. My hands tremble too much for fine work. I know what comes next. Reassignment, menial tasks, then nothing. I am not afraid. Fear requires expectation. I have none. If someone ever finds these thoughts, if such a thing is possible, I want them to understand this. We were not heroes. We were not villains. We were not even victims. Not really. We were the foundation, the billions who lived and died so that the Imperium could continue to grind forward, indifferent and eternal. This is the brutal life of a civilian family in the 41st millennium. Not a story of rebellion, not a tale of escape, just the truth. And in the grim darkness of the far future, truth is the rarest mercy of all. I thought that would be the end of it. Old age, quiet reassignment, a nameless death logged in a ledger no one would ever read again. That is how most civilian lives conclude in the Imperium, without punctuation, without meaning beyond statistical closure. I was wrong. The Imperium does not waste what still breathes. They came for me during second rest cycle. No sirens, no alarms, just a soft chime at the hab door and the hiss of locks disengaging. Two men in gray coats entered, their faces hidden behind rebreathers stamped with the sigil of the administratum. Behind them floated a servo skull, its lens glowing faintly as it scanned my face. Thaddeus Vaughn, one of them said. Hearing my name spoken aloud felt obscene, intimate, dangerous. "You're to be reassigned," the other said, effective immediately. I did not ask why. Questions invite scrutiny. I gathered what little I owned, clothes, ration tokens, the worn Aquila charm my mother once pressed into my hand. I left the hab without looking back. I had learned long ago that attachments slow you down. They took me upward. That alone told me something was wrong. Civilians do not go up unless they are being processed, judged, or consumed. The lift groaned as it climbed through levels I had only seen on pic screens. Cleaner air, stronger lights, walls that did not weep condensation. I felt exposed, like a corpse carried into the open. We stopped at level 12, administrative strata. The hive's mind made manifest. I was led through corridors lined with data slates and robed clerks murmuring prayers as they worked. The scale of it crushed me more than the lower levels ever had. Millions of lives reduced to figures, tracked and balanced like inventory. I was brought into a chamber dominated by a single figure, an adept. Flesh pale and thin, more machine than man. Cables ran from his spine into the wall behind him. His eyes were gone, replaced with glowing augmetics that whirred softly as they focused on me. "You have survived 4 industrial collapses, 2 quarantine purges, and 1 planetary cleansing," he said. "You have no recorded disciplinary violations. No confirmed heretical associations. No living immediate family. I said nothing. You are statistically improbable, the adept continued. The Imperium has a use for improbability. That was how I was conscripted into the tithe of witness, a civilian designation so rare most do not know it exists. We were not soldiers, not scribes, not priests. We were observers, sent into places where compliance was failing, where morale decayed faster than infrastructure. We recorded, we listened, we remembered. Our purpose was to provide unfiltered truth to those too high above the hive to smell the rot themselves. Truth in the Imperium is dangerous. That is why it must be controlled. They sent me off-world for the first time in my life. The void terrified me. Not the sight of it, I never saw it, but the feeling. Weightlessness made me nauseous. The constant vibration of the transport ship burrowed into my bones. Around me were others like me, old, scarred, silent. No one spoke. We were deployed to a frontier world whose name I was not allowed to learn. A planet recently reclaimed from rebellion. Officially pacified. In reality, still bleeding. I was embedded with a civilian family. A reward, they told me. A chance to observe domestic life. The family consisted of 5. Father, mother, 3 children. They lived in a prefab hab on the outskirts of a ruined city, surrounded by the skeletons of buildings shelled into rubble. The war had moved on. The scars remained. The father, Marcus, had once been a factory supervisor. Now he worked clearing unexploded ordnance for ration credits. The mother, Celine, taught basic catechisms to children too young to remember the rebellion. Their eldest son had been taken by the guard 2 months prior. No word since. At night, they sat together in silence, sharing thin soup and thinner hope. The youngest child asked when the emperor would fix the world. No one answered. I watched them for months. I watched Marcus leave every morning, not knowing if he would return. I watched Celine whisper prayers with the desperation of someone bargaining with a god who does not listen. I watched the children grow quieter, their play turning grim, reenacting battles with broken toys. I recorded everything. Then the rebellion flared again. It always does. This time, the response was faster, harsher. The guard returned with flamers and artillery. The sky burned. The ground shook. Civilians were ordered indoors. Marcus did not make it home that day. A shell detonated near the worksite. They brought back what they could identify. A tag, a boot. Celine did not scream. She simply sat down and stared at the wall until the children stopped asking questions. 2 weeks later, the Arbites came. Accusations of insufficient loyalty, failure to report subversive speech, association with known dissidents. It did not matter whether any of it was true. The children were taken for re-education. Celine was executed in the street. I was ordered to observe, not intervene. As her body hit the ground, she looked at me. She did not know who I was, only that I was imperial, that I had survived when she would not. There was no hatred in her eyes, only exhaustion. That night, I made my final report. I did not soften it. I did not frame it in acceptable terms. I wrote the truth as I had lived it, as I had watched it destroyed generation after generation. I do not know who read it. I do know what happened next. The program was terminated. The tithe of witness was deemed unnecessary. Truth, it seems, had become inefficient. They sent me back to the hive. Lower levels. Familiar darkness. Familiar stink. I was home. Now I sit in a hab barely large enough to lie down in. My lungs are failing. My hands barely work. I hear the siren calling others to labor. I can no longer perform. I do not pray anymore. Not because I lack faith, but because I finally understand it. The Emperor does not need our prayers. He needs our endurance. And when we can no longer endure, we are no longer required. This is the legacy of civilian life in the Imperium of man. Not remembered, not honored, just used and forgotten. Sleep comes in fragments now, not rest, never rest, but brief lapses where pain loosens its grip and memory drifts without my permission. In those moments, I am young again. pressed between too many bodies in Habstack 19 Gamma, breathing recycled air and believing that survival was something I could earn. I wake choking, lungs rattling like broken machinery. The Medicae slate embedded in the wall blinks amber. Not critical, not yet. The Imperium is precise about these things. It does not waste urgency. Outside my hab, the hive continues its endless procession. Boots, carts, servo skulls chanting inventory codes. Somewhere a child cries. Somewhere else, a gunshot ends a problem efficiently. I sit up slowly. Every movement feels like negotiation. My bones argue, my muscles protest. I win, eventually. I always have. There is a knock at the door. That alone tells me everything. No one knocks in the lower hive unless they are lost, desperate, or official. Lost people die quickly. Desperate people knock softly. This knock is firm, measured. I open the door. A woman stands there, younger than me by decades, her hair bound tight beneath a worker's hood. Her eyes flick past me into the hab, cataloging everything in an instant. Survival instinct. She holds a data slate to her chest like a shield. "Are you Thaddeus Vaughn?" she asks. I nod. "My name is Mara," she says. "I was told you might listen." That is how it always begins. She steps inside without waiting for permission. The door seals behind her. For a moment, we just stand there, two civilians, measuring each other, both aware that conversation itself can be lethal if overheard. "They say you've seen things," she continues. "Off-world things. Things they don't put in the sermons." "They say many things," I reply. She swallows. "My family is scheduled for relocation." That word again? Polite, bloodless. "Where?" I ask. She shakes her head. "They won't tell us, just that our hab block is being repurposed, that we should be grateful for continued service." I laugh, and the sound surprises us both. It comes out wet and ugly, scraping my throat raw. "Gratitude is mandatory," I say. "So is silence." She leans forward. "My son is 7. I look at her then. Really look. The exhaustion carved into her face. The fear she is trying and failing to hide. I have seen this before. In my mother. In Celine. In countless others whose names I never learned. There's nothing I can do, I tell her. And that is the truth that hurts the most. She stands there a moment longer, as if hoping I will contradict myself. When I don't, something in her collapses. Not loudly, just a quiet internal failure. She leaves without another word. I close the door and slide down the wall until I'm sitting on the floor, breathing hard. This, I think, is what guilt feels like when you've outlived your usefulness. The next day, the sirens wail again. Not the work call, not the purge alarm, the morning tone. It ripples through the hive, slow and heavy, marking a loss too large to ignore. A transport has gone missing in the void. Thousands dead, maybe more. The details will never reach us, but the absence will. Quotas adjusted, rations reduced, new names added to work rosters. I wonder if Mara's family was on that transport. I never find out. Days blur together. My Medicae slate flickers from amber to red and back again. I ignore it. I have learned that acknowledgement accelerates outcomes. One cycle, the prayer broadcast, fails halfway through the litany of endurance. Static replaces the words. For a heartbeat, there is silence across the level. In that silence, I hear something else. Laughter. It echoes faintly through the vents, distorted, wrong. I freeze. Others hear it too. I know because the hive holds its breath. Then, the vox snaps back to life, hymns blaring louder than before, drowning out everything else. The moment passes. No one speaks of it. That night I dream of my daughter. She is older than she ever was, standing beneath a sky I cannot see. She asks me why I stayed, why I endured when others didn't. I try to answer, but my mouth fills with ash. I wake with tears on my face. I do not wipe them away. There's no one left to see them. The Medicae slate turns solid red. I feel it then, the slow shutting down of systems. My heart struggles. My vision tunnels. Each breath feels borrowed. I lie back on the narrow cot and stare at the ceiling I have known my entire life. The metal is pitted, scarred, etched with prayers and curses layered over centuries. I whisper one last thought, not to the Emperor, but to myself. We were here. We mattered, if only because without us, nothing else could stand. The hive will continue. The Imperium will endure. New families will be born into the dark, will love, will lose, will survive until they cannot. That is the cycle. That is the brutality. And somewhere, far above, beneath a sky none of us will ever see, someone will call this victory. My eyes close. The siren sounds. I do not rise. The siren keeps sounding long after my breathing stops. That is the last truth I leave behind. Someone will find me eventually. A servitor, perhaps. A clerk with a slate and tired eyes. My body will be tagged, weighed, and assigned a destination. Recycled, rendered useful. Even now, the Imperium prepares to forgive my failure to continue by converting me into something that can. There will be no funeral, no marker, no record beyond a line of data that confirms a minor reduction in civilian inefficiency. Somewhere, a family will move into this hab. They will scrub the walls and never quite remove the stains. A child will sleep where I died. They will hear the siren and learn what it means before they learn what hope is. They will pray because they must. They will work because they are told. They will endure because endurance is the only virtue the Imperium truly rewards. And one day, when they are old and broken and no longer useful, the hive will swallow them too, without malice, without pause, without memory. This is not tragedy. This is not injustice. This is function. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no heroes among the billions who keep the lights on. There is only survival measured in shifts completed, children lost, and prayers spoken to a God who never answers. I was one of them. That is all I ever was, and that was enough.